You've built your city, but something's missing? What if you could expand it, adding new layers of strategy and immersion? Today we're crafting modular bridges, ramps and low walls, perfect for D&D and Mordheim. These pieces will seamlessly integrate with our existing city tiles and stackers, giving you endless possibilities for layouts and dynamic encounters. Stick around to see how easy it's to build these, plus some painting tricks to make them pop on your table. Hey crafters, welcome back to HANDCRAFTED. Today we're expanding our modular city with some essential new elements: bridges, ramps and low walls. These pieces will add height variation, strategic movement and a more dynamic layout to our city. If you've been following along, you know how flexible this system is, and today we're making even better. So let's get crafting! Time to start! Put on your mask and let's cut some foam. We will begin by cutting the floor, but only in 2 dimensions. In other words, we won't cut the final thickness just yet, since it will be easier to add texture this way. Using a texture roller, press down firmly to imprint the texture onto the foam. For the best results, make sure the side you're applying the texture has been cut. Factory foam comes with a thin coating that has more memory and doesn't hold details as well. Next, we cut the foam to achieve the desired thickness. I went a little overboard and mine broke later, so making it a bit thinner than I did might work better for you. I think the ideal thickness is just under a centimeter, depending on how flexible your foam is. At this point, I started shaping the bridge floor so it will already have a gentle curve. Then, with the piece flipped upside down, I cut at an angle so it could rest properly on the ground. You will see it more clearly in a second. Let's move on to the side pieces. Place the bridge floor in position and use a pen to mark both the top and bottom edges. For the railing, I use a small box from my knife blade refills to make several points, then trace the freehand line. It doesn't have to be perfect, since we will be covering it with tiles later, and small mistakes can be hidden. Lower the temperature of your hot wire cutter to make a precise slow cut. Then do a freehand cut to get the side pieces. Take your time and use smooth movements. If you're using a utility knife instead, just make sure to have a fresh blade. Now that we have our pieces cut, let's texture them. Use a foil ball on both sides, or try a stone or any other method you prefer. By the way, I made the guide on foam texturing a while back. You can check it out here. Alright, time to glue the pieces together. We will be using hot glue. Apply a line of glue, press the pieces together and hold for a few seconds until it sets. Repeat the process for the other side and that's it. It's a pretty simple build, but the result looks great. Oh, and I think I mentioned earlier that one of my bridge floors broke. If that happens to you, don't worry. I just glued mine back together with hot glue. At first, the crack was very visible. I'm not sure if you can tell in the video, but I applied some PVA glue and used my finger to push it into the gap, filling and reinforcing the joint. Once it was dry, you couldn't even tell which bridge had the broken floor. Let's add more details. I've cut some small pillars and textured them with a foil ball. Using a utility knife or a modeling blade, we will carve out a small section to create space for them. Then we will glue them in place with hot glue again. We will do the same for the other side. At this point, I did some test fitting to make sure everything was coming together as I envisioned. Here you can see the walls and ramps that I will show you how to make in just a moment. The stackers and the canal water were made in another video, which I will link here. It's a fantastic build due to its modularity and simplicity. I highly recommend checking it out. Moving on, now we will cut a bunch of long tiles, which will serve as a dual purpose. But before using them, we will add some texture. This time I just scrunched them with my hands, but you can also toss them in a can with some rocks for a more worn out look. With the help of a hot glue gun, we will attach this tile to the top of the railings. This adds extra detail while also covering up imperfections, 2 for 1. Next, we will cover the lower arch by gluing the tiles at an angle. Now this is starting to look great. We are almost done, but I wanted to add one final detail before moving on to the walls. Digging through my material boxes, I found these styrofoam balls. Instead of gluing them directly, I use half a toothpick to create a stronger, more durable joint. A drop of hot glue, insert the piece, and done. We repeat this step on all 4 corners, and now yes, finally, it's finished. Alright, the bridge is done and it's looking great. Now let's move on to the low walls, which will help define spaces and add some extra detail. If you need tools or materials, there is a link down below in the description and in the pinned comment. If you purchase something, I will earn a small commission at no extra cost for you. While I start cutting the first pieces, I want to take a moment to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters. Your names will be on the screen. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps these projects going. Now, let's get back to work. Let's make some low walls. Simple pieces, but incredibly useful as a great cover elements for miniatures. We will start by cutting XPS foam. Since I often work without a fully defined plan, you will notice that I could have done this much more efficiently. But hey, I made the mistake so you don't have to. Ideally, you should cut long strips first and then texture them before chopping them into sections. But well, you will see me do it the other way around. Once we've confirmed the size is right, we can continue cutting. I will remove a thin layer from the top of each wall. Next, I will cut them all at once into roughly 1.5 cm pieces. This will be used to decorate the wall tops and add some variation to the pieces. With all of them cut, we will toss them into a tin with some small rocks and use the well-known shaking method. You can also scrunch them with your hands, but that will result in a less pronounced texture. Now we will set these tiles aside for later and start slicing the walls into sections. Remember what I said, having long strips for these steps and cutting them to size afterward would have been much more efficient. But I didn't do that, so now I have extra work. I tested 2 approaches here. First, I tap all the pieces together on the table. Then, using a metal ruler and a knife, I started carving out brick lines. I thought this would save time, but actually ended up being slower than just working by hand. Plus, this method created less texture variation, so for the opposite side, I switched techniques. Once all the cuts were made, the idea was to go over them with a pen to widen the grooves and make the marks more visible. As I mentioned, I got tired and started working in smaller groups, which turned out to be much more comfortable. Oh, and I forgot to use a foil ball here to add the extra texture. In the end, it didn't make a huge difference, and the result was still good. But I'd recommend adding some extra texture before moving on to the next step, which is simply mixing all the pieces together properly. Great! Now we will use the hot glue gun to stack and glue 5 layers together, forming groups of 5. I made 12 walls in total for myself. This should be enough, but think about your own needs before deciding on a final number. Once that's done, we need to texture the sides. I did this directly using a ballpoint pen onto the foam. Remember the tiles we set aside earlier? Perfect! Now it's time to glue them on. We will keep using hot glue and attach them in sections. I avoided applying glue to the entire wall at once, since that will give me enough time to place all the tiles before it cooled. You can break some of the tiles or leave a few missing if you want a more ruined look. This is especially useful if you're building these walls for a Mordheim board. Subscribe! Okay, now we're going to make some ramps. To do this, I'll be using some stairs that didn't turn out well when I made the ones for the stackers in the harbor video. But if you need to make them from scratch, don't worry, the technique is exactly the same as the one we use for the low walls. These ramps will be twice as wide as the regular stairs, so I will use hot glue to pair them up and make 4 ramps. If you're making them from scratch, just cut them to the correct size from the start. Now, using the hot wire cutter and angling the wire, we will cut them into a ramp shape. I did a few tests here, and the best approach is to glue them first, if that's your case, and then cut. With a ballpoint pen, I will trace the bricks on the top surface, aligning them with the grooves in the wall. For a simple railing, I use some leftovers foam bricks from other projects and matchsticks. We make a small hole to fill the sticks and glue them in place with a bit of hot glue. Once the railing is complete, we attach it to its corresponding spot on the ramp. Repeat this step until all the railings are finished and secured. To add some variety, I will make the surface look like dirt. You could texture it like stone or add tiles, but since the whole city already has a lot of grey, we're going with this approach instead. We spread a bit of wall filler, which will both cover imperfections and give us the texture we're looking for. Tap it lightly with your finger to create some texture, and then, using a matchstick, carve in some cartwheel tracks. Once the filler is semi-dry, but not completely, gently press a paper towel over it to smooth out the texture. Now we just need to let it dry completely, and then it will be ready for priming. With everything built, it's time to paint. We will be using techniques similar to the other city pieces, but with a few variations to keep the things fresh. Most importantly, we're avoiding boring flat grays. Our city should feel alive and weathered, not dull. And while you are here, don't forget to check out my itch.io page, where I've got free adventures and maps to bring even more depth to your tabletop games. Find the link in the video description. Now let's grab those brushes and bring these pieces to life. Let's move on to painting. As always, I'm starting with a couple of layers of black primer. This base coat is a mix of acrylic paint and PVA glue, which strengthens the foam and provides a good surface for the following layers of color. I will be painting all the pieces at once, so forgive me if things seem a bit chaotic. First, I applied a dark brown layer to the dirt areas of the ramps. This isn't an overbrush, I'm fully covering the surface. Next, using a dark red, I painted individual stones on the bridges and low walls. This step adds tonal variation to the stone, helping avoid that flat, boring grey look. Once the red has dried, I applied a neutral grey overbrush across all the stone surface. Black will remain visible in cracks and joints, and the red will be toned down but still noticeable. For this step, I recommend using a cheap makeup brush. Going back to the ramps, I apply an overbrush of medium brown to the dirt. This follows the usual pattern for these types of surface. If you have any questions about these techniques, I will leave my basic painting guide link here. Now let's return to painting individual stones. For this, I used 2 shades of brown. If you are wondering why I did the red earlier and these colors now, it's all about saturation. Since red is more saturated and stands out more from the neutral stone tones, I wanted it to be more mute, which is why I applied it before the grey overbrush. These painting techniques are the same ones I used in the city tiles video. I've just adjusted some of the tones to add variety between pieces. And don't forget to paint some stones on the floor too. With all this done, it's time to apply the first wash. We will do a full black wash over the entire surface. This will darken the pieces, unify the colors, and also reduce the saturation of the individual browns we applied earlier. Once the washes are completely dry, we will go back with the grey overbrush. But be careful, this time we will apply it selectively, here and there, to create even more variation in tone and saturation across the pieces. Now it's time to apply washes to create a richer undertone. All the swatches are homemade and I have a 2-minute video explaining how to prepare them. We will apply them while wet blending directly onto the piece. I've used 2 brushes, one for the greens and another for the browns. Once everything dries, you will see that the effect is much more subtle than it looked when the piece was still wet. Now we just need to do a pure white very light dry brush using a makeup brush. This will highlight the details and texture while adding a bit more cohesion to the piece. With that, the stonework is finished. If you follow these steps, you should have achieved a pretty realistic effect, but there's still one final touch. To fully complete the ramps, there are a couple more steps left. First, we will apply a foam dry brush to bring out the texture of the dirt and the wheel car tracks. Finally, we will paint the wooden rods using a smaller brush. Now that everything is painted, let's set up a small test layout alongside some other city pieces I have. This way, you can see how to use these fun pieces we just built. Alright, now let's bring all these elements together along with some I already had to create a sample layout. First, we place the water tiles with stackers on top to form streets and canals. Next, we add the bridges, ramps and low walls we just finished. We complete the scene with various details like statues, signs and wooden fences. I will also set up a small merchant stall with some supplies and a shelf. In an upcoming video, I will be making a full marketplace, so stay tuned for that. Finally, we bring the streets to life by placing miniatures here and there, simulating that they are going about their task in the bustling streets of this city. Now that everything is in place, let's take some photos to see the final result. And there you have it! Bridges, ramps and walls to expand our modular city. These pieces make a huge difference in creating a more immersive and playable board. If you want to support the channel, like this video, share it with someone and check out my Patreon. And if you want to share your own builds and chat about crafting, join the HANDCRAFTED Discord. I'd love to see what you're working on. Thanks for watching, stay creative, and I will see you in the next one!